Good afternoon, everyone. Carlos Cedillo here. This is an introduction to the book reading of the Ukraine-Russian Ezekiel 38 war. I don't know if you've been watching the news lately, but we are about this close, I'm holding my fingers about 1/8 of an inch apart, to experiencing a nuclear war between Ukraine, Russia, NATO, and the US. Okay, I'm kind of jumping into this speech first. So let me explain a little bit about what I'm doing here in the following videos. My video assignment right now is to share portions of the book, The Ukraine-Russian Ezekiel 38 War. And it just so happens that the key events of this book are jumping right out of the pages in real time right now through the current news media reports. Now, what caused this hair-trigger nuclear scenario between Russia, the US, and NATO? Well, for a while now, Russia has been threatening to use their nuclear missiles if the West continued to send arms and F-16 fighter planes to Ukraine. However, Ukraine crossed several of the red lines where Putin had set this far and no further. But the straw that broke the camel's back was when Ukraine started receiving Storm Shadow missiles, and the Ukraine leader Zelenskyy threatened to shoot these missiles deep into Russian territory. Putin's response to this was immediate. He said this would change the very essence and nature of the conflict. And if this decision was made, it would mean NATO countries, the US, and European countries had declared to participate directly in a war against Russia. And that his country, reserved the right to use nuclear weapons in the event of any aggression against Russia, including even if they used conventional weapons. That is, if these created a critical threat to Russia's sovereignty. This bellicose rhetoric has, of course, put the Western world leaders on the edge of their seat, knowing that this time Putin is not bluffing, and they can no longer hide behind the proxy Ukraine. Putin is now going beyond Ukraine and targeting the US, NATO, and European countries with a nuclear response should any kind of missiles be aimed deep into Russia. All right, moving on. I will begin the reading of portions of the book, The Ukraine-Russian Ezekiel 38 War. But before I begin, let me explain a little bit about why I include Ezekiel 38 in this narrative. It's amazing that the prophet Ezekiel, who lived around 600 BC, had foreseen a war that would involve Russia and the leader of Russia at that time when God would return the people of Israel back to their land, something that has happened now in modern times. See Ezekiel chapter 39. Ezekiel referred to Russia in Ezekiel 38. Ezekiel referred to Russia as Magog and the leader of Russia as Gog. And what brings this home is that this war evolves into a larger war involving Israel and other Mideast countries. In the book, I also include pertinent script from the book of Revelation that suggests a nuclear war scenario that would occur around the same time. And dear readers, don't be shocked when this ancient Ezekiel prophecy and other passages from the book of Daniel begin to expose the leader of Russia as the Antichrist. Okay, so let's begin the book reading of portions of the Ukraine-Russian Ezekiel 38 war. And here we go. I'll start with episode 1. The title of this one, The Ukraine-Russian War. Ramifications of the Ukraine-Russian conflict is the manifestation of the Ezekiel 38 war. In April of 2021, Russian President Vladimir Putin ordered his military to begin massing thousands of personnel and equipment near its border with Ukraine and Crimea. Then, on February 24th of 2022, Russia launched a full-scale military invasion into Ukraine. This invasion happened after Russia had sent an official message calling for the United States and the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO, to stop their military activity in Eastern Europe and Central Asia, to commit against further NATO expansion toward Russia, and to prevent Ukraine from joining NATO in the future. This request was ignored. Now, almost a month later, the news media continues to give daily accounts of Russian assaults on Ukraine. The attacks are coming in on all sides, they say, and they cite more than 60 cities have been attacked, along with Ukraine's capital, Kyiv, where explosions have been reported. To the casual observer, this may seem like another one of those Mideast or Eastern wars which occur frequently on the other side of the world. But this war is no small thing. The Ukraine-Russian war has already evolved into a major conflict that may soon implicate nearby NATO countries and cause a step up in the armament shipments to Ukraine from the US, as well as US sanctions against Russia. And if Ukraine is using US armaments to war against Russia, then the US will now be in the bear's crosshairs. The proximity of the war has also changed the game plan for the EU and surrounding countries. Another subtitle: is this the beginning of the prophetic Ezekiel 38 war? Yes, it definitely looks that way, which indicates that this war will continue for a long time. It can lead us into the final Armageddon war and possibly into a nuclear war. As I'll mention further on in this writing, Gog is a key player in the Ezekiel chapter. That's Gog, G-O-G, not God. Gog is a key player in the Ezekiel chapter, apparently the leader of Russia. He is referred to as the king of the north, and after the Ukraine episode, he will eventually be attacking the king of the south, which will be Israel, and possibly the U.S., also south of Russia, if you go around the hemisphere. This is in Ezekiel 39:2 and Daniel 11. But everyone knows that Israel's staunchest ally is the U.S., so it's very unlikely that anyone could launch a major attack on Israel without first having to deal with the U.S. Unless, of course, Russia opts to take on the U.S. first, makes the first nuclear strike to neutralize America, and then goes after Israel. Considering Russia's nuclear clout and her recent nuclear threats against the United States, this probability could be an 8 on the scale of 1 to 10. Okay, we'll skip over to another subtitle: Russia threatens to use nuclear weapons. I paraphrase the following from John Mearsheimer, professor of political science at the University of Chicago. The Russians have already put their nuclear weapons on high alert, and we may want to be very cautious about pushing them into a corner. If the U.S. gets Ukraine to join NATO, this would be an existential threat for Russia. So, if we're backing a nuclear-armed great power that sees what's happening as an existential threat into a corner, this is really dangerous. Go back to the Cuban Missile Crisis. Washington was scared stiff. They considered the missiles in Cuba to be an existential threat, and they were willing to use our nuclear arsenal against the Soviet Union. That's how serious great powers get when they think they face existential threats. So, what triggered the Ukraine-Russian war? In his speech at the University of Chicago, John Mearsheimer said, "The root of the problem is NATO enlargement, which is the central element of a larger strategy to move Ukraine out of Russia's orbit and integrate it into the West. Russian leaders have adamantly opposed NATO enlargement in recent years. They have made it very clear that they would not stand by while their strategically important neighbor turned into a Western bastion. Question: how is it possible there could be a nuclear war? Does the Revelation Ezekiel narrative include a nuclear scenario? Answer: I wish you hadn't asked me that, but yes. The book of Revelation speaks of a great city or nation upon many waters that shall be judged and destroyed with fire in 1 hour. The 1 hour time period is repeated 3 times, so that indicates an actual time segment of 60 minutes. 2,700 years ago, at the time of the author of Revelation, it would have been virtually impossible for any military power to destroy a city, much less a nation, in 1 hour. However, today, in the 21st century, we have the capacity with nuclear weapons to destroy an entire nation in one or less in 1 hour or less. I'll say more about this in a later episode. Okay, now we're going to skip forward to page 14. Here's the subtitle, what is the Ezekiel 38 war? This amazing chapter is about a war foretold by the prophet Ezekiel sometime in the years 592 to 570 BC. The prophetic script describes a personality named Gog of Magog. And again, that's spelled G-O-G. It's not God, it's Gog. Gog of Magog, and he's a major player in the Ezekiel narrative. He's going to come out of the north to make war and eventually attack the people of Israel. He will also invade the area around the mountains of Israel, which I think will be the valley of Megiddo, where the Battle of Armageddon will take place. This ominous character, Gog, is going to be the leader of Meshech, ancient name for Russia's capital. So, to answer a previous question, yes, I believe that what we're seeing here on the ground is the Ukraine-Russian conflict. I believe that what we're seeing here on the ground with the Ukraine-Russian conflict is the Ezekiel 38 war as prophesied by Ezekiel. However, Ukraine will be a minor target because then it will be Israel that is attacked and possibly the U.S. or the other way around. First the U.S., then Israel. One thing to ponder at this crucial moment of world history is that the pandemic has demonstrated that we're now living in the time of the end when many end-time prophecies will come to the fore, including the Ezekiel 38-39 prophecies. Okay, we'll stop there, and we'll move on to another section. We'll pick it up here. And it's interesting to note that most biblical scholars and theologians consider that Gog of Magog in the Ezekiel and Revelation narratives is the Antichrist. Notably, Scripture itself points to Gog as the Antichrist. This is clearly manifested in Daniel 11, where he mentions the king of the north and the prince of the covenant, all references to the Antichrist. Daniel also describes the activities and military strategies of the Antichrist, which are a repeat of the actions of Gog in the Ezekiel 38 chapter. All right, so now we'll skip over to another section. We're now in episode 2. This subtitle is called Will Gog of Magog Lead Russia in the year 2022? Now, this is a scary thought, but the present Ukraine-Russian war is the prophesied war of Ezekiel 38, or the start of it, then Russia's current president could very well be a prime candidate for the Gog position. who will eventually morph into you-know-who. But there's still space before this prophetic passage matures into real time. The presidential terms for Russia are 6 years, but according to CBSNews.com, Putin has already signed a law allowing him to serve 2 more terms as Russia's president. Okay, we're going to stop right there and stay tuned for part 2, which will come after this.